Imagine, for just a second, the sheer, overwhelming avalanche of information you process on any given Tuesday.
Oh, yeah. It is a lot.
Right. I mean, the notifications lighting up your screen, the conflicting headlines, the claims, the counterclaims, all the data points being thrown at you in meetings. It is just a relentless barrage.
And you're constantly forced to play this really exhausting game of mental triage just to figure out what is actual reality and what is just noise.
Exactly. But what if there was a shortcut? Like a simple, almost suspiciously basic framework for sorting truth from fiction. And it happens to be hiding in plain sight inside two of the most famous children's stories ever written.
I mean, it does sound a bit absurd when you first lay it out like that. We are essentially looking to a mythical shepherd boy and a cartoon elephant to solve modern information overload.
We absolutely are. So today we are doing a deep dive into this really brilliant essay called The Wolf and the Who, Two Architectures of Truth.
Yeah, it's a fascinating piece.
The whole mission of this deep dive is to give you, the listener, a powerful mental framework to decode the information you encounter every single day. We're going to map it all to either wolf logic or who logic.
Right.
Okay, so let's unpack this. The core premise here is that Aesop's The Boy Who Cried Wolf and Dr. Seuss's Horton Hears a Who aren't just cute little morality tales. They actually encode two completely opposite specifications for how a claim behaves over time.
Especially when that claim is put under pressure, right? And what's really fascinating here is that to understand the mechanics of these logics, we have to look at the texts themselves, because their distinct forms actually dictate their function.
Meaning, like, how they were written changes what they do.
Exactly. The sheer evolutionary difference between these two stories tells us what they were built for. I mean, look at Aesop. This fable is ancient.
Oh yeah, like thousands of years old.
Right. It is authorless, gathered under Aesop's name across all these overlapping Greek and Latin collections centuries ago. It's almost certainly older than any written version that survives today.
Which means it was honed entirely by oral tradition. I always think of that as like a mental virus optimized for survival.
That's a great way to put it. An oral tradition strips away all the fluff, you know? A story only survives that kind of transmission if it's short enough to repeat exactly.
The shape of the disaster basically has to do the convincing.
Yes, it has to be severe enough in its consequence that the lesson lands immediately, and simple enough that it requires absolutely no secondary argument.
It's a portable, low-cost inoculation against one very specific human failure mode. You just hear it once around a fire,
Yeah,
and you get the point forever.
exactly. Now, hold that ancient stripped-down survival tool up against Horton Hears a Who. We are looking at the complete opposite kind of object here.
A modern published book.
Right. It is a single, dated, individually authored text, published in 1954 by Theodore Geisel, who we obviously know as Dr. Seuss. And to understand the logic of this text, you really have to dig into his specific historical context.
Because he wasn't always just writing about elephants and cats and hats.
Right. No, not at all. Geisel spent the 1940s as a political cartoonist. And in those wartime cartoons, he was arguing loudly and repeatedly against an American public that was inclined to treat a real growing danger as someone else's problem.
Right, because the danger was all the way across an ocean.
Hmm.
The public was treating it as conveniently distant and therefore, beneath serious notice, out of sight, out of mind.
Precisely. His whole argument during the war was, hey, the danger is real, start pretending it's too far away to matter. But then, fast forward a little over a decade, after World War II, Geisel actually travels to Japan.
Okay.
And he experiences this profound, well-documented change of heart regarding the people there. He comes home and he writes Horton. The exact same creative mind flicks the emotional direction entirely from threat to value.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's now insisting, hey, the population is real. Stop pretending it's too small to matter.
Wait, so you're telling me the exact same cognitive shortcut, judging what's real by how visible it is, was used by the exact same author to argue two completely different points a decade apart?
Yeah, exactly.
That is wild. First, it was like, pay attention to this invisible threat. And then later, pay attention to this invisible value.
It's the identical argument against the same human blind spot, whether it's vast geographic distance or microscopic size. We habitually dismiss what we can't easily perceive. He was basically arguing that personhood or reality itself doesn't shrink just because it requires more effort to see.
That is such a powerful setup. Okay, so now that we know where these stories come from, let's look at the first architecture. What happens when a signal has absolutely nothing behind it?
The wolf logic.
Right. So if we look at the essay, it frames the boy's lie as essentially a financial scam. It's withdrawal without a deposit.
Which is a brilliant analogy. The originating condition of the fable sets this up perfectly. The shepherd boy is simply bored.
Yeah, there is no malice.
Exactly. No grand strategic goal. It's just an empty afternoon and a human appetite for a reaction.
He manufactures an effect. He gets an entire village to drop what they are doing and sprint uphill without an actual cause. He literally just shouts one word.
Which reveals the terrifying underlying mechanics of a lie.
Yeah.
I mean, a lie isn't just a false description of something real. It is a true description of nothing, dressed up in the syntax of an emergency.
The syntax of an emergency. I love that phrasing. We're talking about the shape of the communication, right? Like the panic, the volume, the urgency that forces people to react before they have time to verify if there's actual fur and fangs.
Yes, exactly. The urgency is doing all the heavy lifting because the reality isn't there to do it. Think about the wolf itself for a second. Reality doesn't need an audience.
Right. A real wolf is just going to do its thing.
Right. If there's an actual predator out there, it's going to eat the sheep, regardless of whether the villagers believe the boy or not. The wolf doesn't care if its existence is credited.
It's just a biological fact.
Exactly. But a lie. A lie only has the currency of belief. It has no independent existence. If the villagers just shrug and stay home, the lie produces literally nothing.
So it has to draw that belief from somewhere. It draws it from one specific account, the boy's own credibility. And trust is structurally a finite resource.
It really is.
Every cry that turns up empty isn't just a neutral mistake. It's a withdrawal against trust with no matching deposit. There was no wolf, so the boy generates no asset, no proof, to repay the cost of alarming the village.
And the ledger only ever moves in one direction, down. And that's really why the story requires repetition to make its point.
Oh, because a single mistake could just be a misunderstanding.
Right. A solitary false alarm could just be written off as a trick of the light. But the repetition shows the system actively going bankrupt. He repeats the prank, and the marginal cost, the toll it takes on his reputation, is identical every single time.
He makes a full withdrawal against an account that is never replenished.
Exactly. No amount of volume or shouting can manufacture a real referent out of thin air.
And then, of course, the real wolf arrives. And the channel that truth would need to travel through has already been completely spent by the falsehoods. The mechanism that would have saved the sheep was destroyed by something that had nothing to do with sheep at all, just an empty afternoon and a few shouted words.
It's a really chilling thought when you frame it that way, but let's pivot to the inverse math here. If a lie depletes an account, what happens when a claim is actually true, but no one believes it?
Right. We shift from Aesop to Seuss to see the exact opposite mechanism in action. Logic.
Yes. So Horton hears a speck of dust on a clover. He hears a tiny sound on the breeze. Now, he might be wrong about the specific details like the exact size of the population or the layout of their city, but he isn't wrong about the basic claim.
Something physical is there.
Exactly. Something is there.
And his truth is completely independent of anyone's vote. The Whos are real with or without Horton. They are real with or without the sour kangaroo's opinion. If every single animal in the jungle of Newell held a vote and agreed unanimously that the Whos didn't exist, they would still exist. Disbelief can hide the Whos, but it cannot unmake them.
That is the core difference. The wolf needs belief to have any effect at all. The Whos are entirely unaffected by a total absence of belief. Their reality is already present. It's just waiting to cross a threshold of perception.
I always misremembered the ending of this story. Usually when we think about a hard truth finally being accepted by society, we assume it wins because its champion just argues the loudest or refuses to give up. Doesn't Horton win by just being the most stubborn animal in the jungle?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's actually not that at all. It is a really common misreading, but the text completely inverts that assumption. It is not about the loudest voice or the strongest advocate.
Really? Because he goes through a lot.
He does, but the breakthrough doesn't come because Horton refuses to quit. The entire town of Whoville is making noise, banging on pots and pans, shouting as loud as they can, and the jungle still can't hear them. They haven't crossed that physical threshold of audibility.
Oh, I see.
The breakthrough happens because of the Whoville mechanism. It's about completeness.
The Whoville mechanism. Okay, that actually reminds me of trying to get a wave going at a crowded stadium.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Like, one guy standing up and waving his arms does nothing. 10 guys shouting does nothing. You don't need the loudest fan in the world. You just need that critical mass where the guy in row Z finally stands up and suddenly the whole stadium flips.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it, yes. The most important structural choice Dr. Seuss makes is what happens in that final moment. The breakthrough doesn't come from the mayor of Whoville shouting even harder.
Right.
It comes from finding the one voice that hadn't yet joined in. A small boy, occupied elsewhere, playing with a yo-yo.
He turns out to be exactly the missing increment.
Exactly. When his tiny, seemingly insignificant voice is added, the aggregate sound crosses from inaudible to undeniable in a single step. Truth in this architecture is validated by completeness, not volume alone.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. We have two completely different mechanics of repetition here. The boy repeats his cry, and the volume bankrupts the system. The Whos repeat and multiply their voices, and the volume accumulates to cross a threshold.
Right.
But look at who pays the price for these repetitions and when. There's this incredible asymmetry of cost.
Yes, the deferred externalized cost of wolf logic is massive. The boy pays nothing up front, zero immediate price. He gets a free thrill.
And society pays the price later.
Exactly. The bill comes due later and it's paid by everyone else, the villagers, the sheet, at the worst conceivable moment. The damage to the social fabric is structural, but the cost of who logic, that is the inverse. It's immediate, it is internalized, and it is paid entirely by the messenger.
Horton pays the entire price up front. He looks crazy to everyone he knows.
Yeah.
He is mocked by the sour kangaroo. He is physically hunted by the Wickersham brothers. They steal his clover.
He really goes through it.
He absorbs the entire social cost of holding a truth that hasn't yet become verifiable to the rest of his community.
But crucially, none of that cost touches the Whos. Their reality isn't diminished by Horton's suffering. The mockery doesn't make Whoville a single inch smaller.
Right.
The theft of the clover doesn't erase a single citizen. The truth itself absorbs zero damage. Only its witness does.
So truth-telling, when it goes against the grain, is essentially a toll charged at the border of recognition. Lying costs the world later in a currency the liar destroyed. Truth-telling costs the teller now in reputation and standing, which has absolutely nothing to do with whether the claim is actually physically true.
Yes. And at this point, we should probably pull this out of literature and map it onto the real information landscape you actually navigate today, because who logic shows up constantly in the real world.
Oh, absolutely.
Particularly when you look at suppressed information or history. Think about material that is actively scapegoated or hidden because it threatens to cross a threshold that someone in power prefers to keep below the noise floor.
It's so easy to look at this and think of it purely as mythology. But let's look at your actual news feed today, or historical records. How often are you seeing the Wickersham tactic play out in real time?
All the time. When those monkeys steal the clover, they don't do it because they've mathematically disproven the Whos.
Right. They do it because removing the object is infinitely easier than engaging with the claim. They carry the clover off and drop it into a massive field of millions of identical clovers. They hide it in a haystack built specifically to swallow it.
And eventually, they even try to boil the clover. They literally attempt to destroy the evidence permanently. The essay provides a really striking, real-world example of this exact dynamic, primordial mother goddesses. Yeah, across various cultures, early traditions centered on these figures were displaced. But the new institutions didn't just disagree theologically. They recast those original goddesses as monsters or local demons.
Wait, so if the Wickersham brothers of history completely erase the evidence, like if they recast the goddess as a demon or they literally boil the clover, I'd assume the truth is just dead. The bad guys win. How does the truth ever come back from that level of erasure?
Well, because evidence removal is rarely perfect. Those figures didn't stop being real historical artifacts when they were written out of the official record. They were just pushed artificially below a threshold of cultural audibility.
Okay, so they were disguised.
Exactly. The institutions making that move were disguising the object so thoroughly that anyone encountering it no longer recognized what they were looking at. But the truth returns through the Whoville mechanism in the real world.
It doesn't come back through, like, one pristine text surviving.
No, almost never. Or a single advocate winning a grand debate. It comes back through minor increments.
A recovered fragment of comparative mythology.
Huh?
A weird, hyper-local folk practice that nobody thought belonged in the main account.
Exactly. A footnote, an overlooked regional epithet, a somatic practice like a traditional dance or a seasonal ritual that carries a physical memory the written text's lost.
Oh, wow.
These tiny increments act exactly like the small boy at the edge of Whoville playing with his yo-yo. They are incredibly easy to overlook, but they are the exact missing increment needed to let a wider pattern finally resolve into something audible. They are basically the immune response of history.
So the suppression itself isn't proof of absence. It's actually a signature. Nobody sends an army of monkeys to steal a wolf that doesn't exist.
Right.
The sheer effort of the theft only makes sense if there's an actual city on that clover.
That is exactly it. Which raises an important question and brings us to the profound psychological root of all of this. We've seen how these logics play out in society and history, but let's trace them all the way back to the exact moment they originate inside a single person.
The somatic core. Whenever we use the word somatic, we're talking about the raw physical body, right?
Right. The physical reality of your senses versus the social calculation of your brain. Look at the origins. The shepherd boy's lie originates entirely from a social desire. He wants a reaction from the crowd.
Right. There is no physical wolf to react to.
But Horton's truth originates from a somatic fact. His actual physical eardrum registers a real sound wave before his brain or his community has any time to weigh in on what is socially plausible.
There is a massive tension there between what my eyes and ears are telling me and what the group consensus demands, I believe. The ultimate test presented by these two stories is whether you will let social pressure override a somatic physical fact.
Yes. The entire jungle surrounds Horton and demands that he accept their comfortable cognitive story, that a speck is just a speck, that he is making it up, that it's all make-believe.
They threaten him with violence if he doesn't agree to abandon his own senses. If Horton had waited for a committee consensus before trusting his own ear, the timeline where the Who's survive simply doesn't happen.
Right. The entire load-bearing mechanism of that story is that he refuses to let fear, cognition, and overwhelming social pressure overrule what his body actually registered.
The boy is a clean case of frantic energy with zero organic root. Horton is a quiet organic fact that simply insists on itself until the rest of the world is forced to catch up. So what does this all mean for the listener? Let's bring this all together.
Yeah, let's do that.
We are living in an era where we are absolutely drowning in repeated high-volume claims. Wolf logic is a manufactured signal,
Yeah.
has no organic root. It is noise generated purely for a social payoff, and every single time it is repeated, it depletes a shared resource, our collective trust, that it never paid into. It is a withdrawal.
And who logic is an organic fact. It is real, regardless of who believes it, and it simply waits, often at great, immediate personal cost to the person holding it, for perception to finally catch up.
Right. Volume alone doesn't make it true. Completeness makes it audible. So next time you were scrolling through your feed, watching the news, or sitting in a tense meeting and you hear a loud, repetitive claim, I want you to ask yourself, is this repetition spending down an empty account?
Or is it adding small, real increments to a truth that is just waiting to cross the threshold?
Is it a withdrawal or a deposit? You can usually tell it apart by looking underneath the insistence to see who is actually paying the price.
Look at what happens to the underlying account of credibility each time the claim is made. Does it grow richer with evidence, or does it require more and more frantic shouting to sustain the illusion?
We started this deep dive talking about the exhausting avalanche of information you face every day and how impossible it can feel to sort the noise from the truth. These two texts tell us that truth is validated by completeness, by every single voice that belongs in the chorus actually being invited into it. So here's a final thought to mull over as you go back into that avalanche today. Think about a complex problem you're trying to understand right now. Maybe it's a conflict in your own life, a persistent, unsolvable issue at your workplace, or a tangled narrative in the news that just isn't making sense.
We all have those.
If you are struggling to make the truth of that situation clear, to make it audible, maybe you don't need to shout louder. Maybe you don't need to argue more forcefully or find a bigger platform. Maybe you need to stop, look around, and search for the equivalent of that small boy at the edge of Whoville. Who or what is the quietest, most overlooked piece of evidence that you haven't invited into the chorus yet?